license, and we set up a group. I formed PGP with two partners, and we deliver five distinct services to cannabis companies: strategy, branding, marketing, legal compliance, and operational readiness.
All right, everyone, welcome back to Sales Biz. I appreciate you taking the time. Before we get started with our episode today, I need you all to do me a huge favor and go ahead and hit that subscribe button, hit the like button, and if you find any value out of this specific cast, go ahead and drop some comments down below. Today, my guest has a long line of sales experience, entrepreneurship experience, and advisor experience. Saw his profile, caught my eye. I had to introduce myself, and super excited to host him and share his knowledge, Mr. Michael Epstein. Michael, welcome.
Thank you, Mike. Thank you for having me. I appreciate it.
And I appreciate you taking the time.
Yeah, it's been the end of a long week and a long day. So it's a great way to wrap up with you, 5 p.m. The only thing would be better is if you'd sent me over a cocktail so we could just be having a martini or something while we have this conversation. Come on, it's Friday, 5 o'clock. What's wrong? You don't send a cocktail, Mike.
I think we're onto something. Does this service like that exist? Because we might be onto $1 billion idea here.
Yeah, there you go. We should have during COVID, right? Shouldn't we? Cocktails on delivery. You got DoorDash. We need like Bar Dash or something.
Michael, go online, GoDaddy. Let's trademark it right now before someone sees this. Well, I appreciate you taking the time, Michael. Once again, your profile caught my eye. I wanted to introduce myself. You and I are both Cali boys, so figured we'd have a great conversation. Let's start it off with a little bit about your background. Tell us a little bit about how you got into entrepreneurship, business side. What really inspired you to get in that side of the field?
I would love to tell you that it was a really clear, thought out plan, but that's just not the case. I literally had a friend who I started in the garment business when I was 19 years old. And I had a friend who painted these kids' t-shirts. And I said to her, you could sell these. And she said, I'm never going to sell these. And I said, well, okay, then how about you paint them and I'll sell them? And a business was born and a businessman. Within about a year and a half, business was so brisk that I really had the choice. I was a full-time college student. I really had the choice of, was I going to stay in school or was I going to grow the business? And growing the business was just significantly more interesting to me. And much to my father's chagrin, he had a PhD. My mother had a master's. To both of their chagrins, I dropped out and ramped the business up full time. Very, very sweet story is that my father continuously said to me through the years, when you want to go, if and when you want to go back to school, I got money put aside for that. I got money put aside for that. Until the point where literally I was about 35 years old and I had a 2-acre spread in Malibu and I had 5 kids of my own and a staff and a whole thing. And he'd still come over to the house and said, if you want to go back to school, I still got money set aside for that. And I'd say to him, Dad, my nut's pretty big now. Like, that's going to be really expensive for me to go back to school now. And he'd say to me, if you want to, we'll figure it out.
A problem solver. I love it.
Problem solver. Yeah. So
well, I love the partnership early on, though. Sounded like a Wozniak, Steve Jobs type of environment. You build, I sell. We all make.
Well, if only it was that. It's not an Apple story. It was a little children's clothing company that I think maxed out at, I don't know, $1 million a year in revenue, something like that. But I did it for 8 years and we ended up with manufacturing and wholesale operations and a couple of retail stores. And really, I consider it the equivalent of having gotten my MBA, right? I just learned it in the room rather than in the classroom. And so, that's the way it started for me.
I think the majority of the most successful entrepreneurs did it that way. It's instead of me paying this $150K bill, how do I just figure it out on my own and make it happen?
Yeah.
Kudos
well,
to
the
you.
Interesting part about a first business, when you're that naive at 19, I came out of it at 27 years old with a list of the things I didn't want in business. And that list has stayed very true for me. So I knew I didn't want to be in retail after owning retail stores. I knew I didn't want to be managing accounts receivable after being a manufacturer and wholesaler and managing a lot of accounts receivable, having my cash flow tied up in somebody else's payables, in other words, right? I knew I didn't want receivables. I knew I didn't want to be in, low cost negotiations. I literally decided to get out of that business, to sell that business one day when I was negotiating tenths of cents on button prices. And I just got into my head like, man, there's got to be a better way to make money than negotiating tenths of cents. And not to put down those people that do that. There's a role for everybody, but I found a better path. Let's put it that way.
I'm glad you did, but I mean, are we talking like a tenth of a cent with a billion, buttons, or are we talking about like 200?
No, I can't remember. I mean, we ordered a lot of buttons. These were custom dyed, custom made buttons, and I don't remember what the quantities were. I just thankfully have pushed that out of my head. But it was. I apologize. It sounds like a gardener over there. I hope you can't hear there's a mower or a blower or something. Great. Yeah, but whatever it is, it wasn't enough volume to have made the tenths of cents really meaningful.
Yeah, that makes sense. So it sounds like you were not really a school kind of guy. You were just trying to.
I loved school. I loved school. Oh yeah, I'm a history buff, and I read a lot, and I'm a writer. Probably science was never my strong suit, but I loved school. I really did. At college, I wasn't quite sure what my major was. I wasn't one of those people who knew, I want to be a doctor or a lawyer or an accountant or a, social worker or teacher. I didn't have that clarity. I was sort of a liberal studies student looking for what it might be. And the business just owned me. I mean, the building a business and watching it happen was just fascinating to me. I loved every aspect of learning it. And so the choice between those two, one that was highly stimulated and one in which I was sort of trying to find a pathway, it was a no-brainer for me. And for the most part, I have to say I haven't regretted it. There have been moments when I've been in certain rooms where I've regretted the lack of a more formal education through, a bachelor's degree or master's degree, but very rarely.
Love it. So the school side of it, did you have like a favorite topic or something? I mean, you seem to be very Ken on the history side of it, you mentioned, but nothing on the business side at all?
I hadn't really studied business to that point. No. I certainly have now been involved in a number of, business discussions and lectures and situations that provided learning environments. And look, I think going to school for business is a smart idea. I will tell you that in my 30 plus year career, the smartest executive I've ever worked with, she was a graduate of a Stanford MBA program. And Stanford, clearly one of the standout universities, but that MBA education that she got in business was just second to none. Really well-balanced person anyway, but that MBA was really put her in top of the class kind of business category.
Yeah. That school teaches you how to create your own job as opposed to joining a company. So
yeah. And today she is, I can't even really take credit for having mentored her. I was the CEO of a company where she was I think her title was director of marketing, and she eventually became a director of operations. And then I hired her into another company, and she became a CMO and a COO of that company. And today she is the CEO of a, company that's probably 150, $200 million a year. So she's hit the mark.
Stanford, mission accomplished.
Yeah,
well done.
Exactly.
So, favorite part of your business was when you first got into it, obviously not negotiating, or you just figured you liked negotiating, but just not for the sums that you were negotiating?
I liked negotiating. I think negotiations is one of those things you learn. And over the course of my career, my negotiating style has certainly changed. I would point out, sort of, there's probably be three major chapters of that. The first chapter would have been naive, right? And just trying to figure it out, going by the seat of my pants. The second was really getting into deep control of my business know-how, and I became a very tough negotiator. I mean, I was a son of a bitch, frankly. I didn't think I'd won unless there was blood on the table, and I think it was just ego and sort of a certain age hubris and wanting to show off what I knew and what I could do. And now I've graduated over the last 15 years or so to I really want everybody to win at the negotiation. I'm really not interested. The pizza isn't fun unless we each get a slice, right? So I kind of bring that attitude to it. I really, and most of the deals that I'm in or have been in over the last 15 years, I gravitate towards those that have room for everybody to succeed.
Love it.
So yeah, so it's I think we do go through as we grow individually, we go through different stages individually, we grow as business people too.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that level of, I don't want to call it aggression, maybe tenacity, is not necessarily a bad thing, Michael. I mean, it sounds like you have a little bit of resentment over it and then spent the last 15 years kind of paying it forward after. So
no, it's not a resentment. It's I think there is a sharpness is what I would call it. And I enjoyed that sharpness. I don't apologize for it. I don't, there was a way I wanted to conduct business at that stage in my life, and I did it, and I was quite successful at it. And other things changed in life, and I wanted to conduct business differently, and I'm quite good at the way I conduct it now. I think I've got the skill set to be sharp if I wanted to be. I've been successful enough. I've been doing this long enough that there isn't so much to prove at this stage. And yeah. I'm happy to bring other people along.
Love it. Where did you pick up those sharp SOB skills, by the way? Did you have a specific mentor? Did you read some books?
I definitely was mentored by a few people. I always sought mentors. And I think mentors are so important. And actually, one of the things about getting to the stage I'm at in your business career is, I'm in the last few years of it. By whether I go another 5 years or another 10 years or another 15 years, it's hard for me to find mentors at this stage. You know what I mean? And I regret that. That's something I wish I had a mentor. I wish I had somebody to turn to and say, how'd you navigate the last 10 years of your business career? What was important and what wasn't? What did you do well? What did you, mess up? And I think of it to some degree like, the athletes, right? And, we look at certain athletes and we go, wow, he or she stepped away just at the perfect moment. Or they stepped away while they were still in their prime and then tried to come back. That was a little dismal. Or they stepped away too late, and some of the shine had fallen off the star, So there's those kinds of things. But I think mentors are very, very important. And I started with one at age 19. His name was Arnie Freeman. Arnie died last year. I'm very close friends with his two daughters and his grandson. And I'm actually in business with somebody who's a former partner of his. We're doing a lot of business things together. So, but Arnie was the guy. I mean, I can remember being in a business meeting and I had no idea how to start a business meeting. Just the actual beginnings of, do you make that small talk? And when do you transition to the topic? And how do you raise the topic? And sort of how do you put your cards on the table? Like, I just was green as green could be. And I called Arnie and I said, I was just in a business meeting. I had no idea how to start it. What do you do? And he said, come join me this afternoon. And I got to attend a business meeting that he was the centerpiece of. And he just laid it out. And it was so clear for me. those are the kind of things that I don't think you learn in an MBA program, by the way. Those are the things that you need a mentor for. Those are the things that you need to watch somebody else start a business meeting and go, oh, that's how it's done. Right.
Yep.
And then you view the various styles, you see other people do it, and you adopt yours accordingly. I think mentors are very important.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more with you, Michael. I was blessed to have really good mentors in my life. I'm a high school dropout, but I eventually ended up going back to college because of mentorship and having a good circle. And specifically in business, getting into my sales career, I pretty much attribute 95% of what I've done to the mentors and the managers and the leaders that I've had.
Yeah.
So I couldn't agree with you more. And condolences for your mentor. Seemed like it was something painful for you. We're not going to get too deep into it, but
Yeah.
I know what that's like, losing a good mentor, and you owe a lot of what you are to him. So kudos to
Yeah.
that.
Yes.
So going back to that, actually, do you remember your first management gig, and then do you actually had people underneath you? How did you
Yeah, my
navigate
first
that?
management gig was my own company. Was the clothing business I'm describing, the apparel business, and we ended up in that business, my partner and I, with maybe in the manufacturing operation, we probably peaked at I don't know, 10, 12 employees. There was no real management structure. They just reported all directly to the partners, one partner or the other, something like that, 10 or 12. And then my real experience in management, I joined another company after I sold that, and um, I sort of worked my way up in that next company. And in about at about 2 or 3 years in, I became the director of marketing, and I had a team of about 10. And then I became the chief operating officer, and I was really overseeing a team of about 200. And then I
Wow.
became the chief executive officer. And during that time period, the company probably grew to about 250 employees. So it
Wow.
really, that's a lot, and that had your real typical management structure. We had a C-suite of 4 people. We had sort of the equivalent of an EVP level of 8 that reported up to the C-suite. And then those 8 had assistants and so forth, and a very traditional kind of structure there. That for me, managing, being the CEO of a company with about 250 employees, it's like being the mayor of a small town. It really is. If you care about your people, they're coming in and out of your office, they're bringing life's problems, they're bringing their issues. And although we had in that company, we had an HR person, and we had a payroll person, and a benefits person, we had people to address those things. Because we had a very open door policy, they would end up in my office as the CEO, as the COO's office, in the general counsel's office, in the CFO's office, and we brought them in. I mean, that was the way it was. We ran a very familial kind of enterprise, but it was like being the mayor of a small town.
Yeah. Sounds like you're a great manager. I mean, open door policy is probably one of the most important when it comes to running a company. Because once again, going back to my experience, all of my CEOs had that type of nature where some didn't even have an office. Some just sat in the bullpen with us. Some had an office, but no door. It was,
Yeah.
come on in, just make sure, give me a quick heads up, possibly shoot me a Slack or something. But it sounds like you had the management game down. Were there any point in times where you were like, wow, I hate this. This is too much pressure, too much responsibility
No,
for me?
no, no, no. But I will say this. I just want to say this too about managing a sales team, because I know a lot of your focuses are in sales. And, uh, I think managing a sales team requires a lot of psychology. I think you really need to know the psychology of each of your salespeople and how to motivate them. And I think every salesperson motivates a little bit differently. You've got these sort of general categories, but then they really motivate differently. And as I can remember a point in which, as the director of marketing, I had a sales team of 8, 10, 12, and I just had them, sort of really understood them. And a crack sales team, we sort of revised the sales process, but we went from something like 20 new accounts a month to 80 new accounts a month. We
Wow.
quadrupled the sales process. And the value of each sale was probably in the range of $25,000 in the first year. So in terms of new revenue to the company, so it was significant. It was a significant bump, and that
170,000 sounds like gross revenue, not bad.
The company ended up closing in on 50 million a year in gross revenue during the management period. But part of it was that particular crack sales team that really built something. So so I think managing teams is important, and knowing the team you're managing and what to me, when you're the manager of that team, it's about servicing them. It's not about them servicing you. You're servicing them.
Absolutely.
And then it works. My only takeaway from being the manager, the CEO of that big of a group, 250, is honestly that I didn't want to do it again. I have since that time, I have really led a series of companies in which we utilized a lot of outsourcing. Of course, outsourcing came more into vogue as well. Perhaps during that time period, there weren't as many outsourcing options. But I am a believer that we should outsource wherever possible. And it also comes from I've done a couple of turnarounds. I've led a couple of turnarounds. And, when you go in and you do a turnaround, it's really about identifying what's the core capability of this company, what's its core DNA, what does it do well, identify that and do a whole lot more of that. And my experience is from looking at most companies do that one thing really well. There's typically a handful of things they need to do relatively well to support the one thing they do really well, and just about everything else they do poorly and shouldn't be doing, right? There's inefficiency just about every place else. So to the degree that you can outsource that everything else is probably a good idea in most cases.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm glad that you brought up you were managing a sales team. I thought you were always in the C-suite category. So kudos to you there. You mentioned something about being a writer. Are we talking blogs, books?
So I come, if you look at CEOs and entrepreneurs, they typically come out of either the finance department, the legal department, or sales and marketing. And so I'm a sales and marketing CEO. I'm a sales and marketing leader. And along the way in building a couple of big brands, I built a couple of nice size sort of mid-market companies. I built a couple of top 1,000 brands in the United States. And so when you do that kind of branding work, it's really all about narrative. And so you sort of have to understand writing to be able to build narratives around brand. And that now still remains a lot of the work I do, and the advisory work that I do, and the investment work that I do. I do a lot of defining narrative and really finding the authentic narrative. And that goes towards brand building. So by the nature of the business side, I consider myself a writer in terms of that brand work. But yeah, I am a writer creatively as well. My father was actually a writer, and none of his children became professional writers. But by the time we were all, probably by the time we were all in our 40s, we were all writing in one form or another. So it might be in the blood.
Mission accomplished either way. I'm sure Dad's proud.
Yeah.
So let's talk about your current company right now, Michael. Primary Growth Partners. Tell us a little bit about that business and how did you fall into that specific category?
So Primary Growth Partners, we do advisory work specifically for the cannabis industry, primarily in California, but we have some clients outside of California as well. And I understood probably in 2017 what was coming in cannabis in California, right? We were having adult use legalization January 1, 2018. And I understood that regardless of whether at a federal level we had a reclassification of the Schedule I standing of cannabis, that if that never happened, and it most assuredly will, but if that never happened, we could build very, very sizable brands and companies in California alone, just in California. And so I began meeting with a number of the legacy companies as well as the professionals that service the industry, the lawyers and accountants and investment bankers that service the industry. And I discovered really a need in a lot of the cannabis companies. There's some really interesting brands and products, but they needed some advisory work, frankly. They needed some professionalization. And so we set up a group. I formed PGP with 2 partners, and we deliver 5 distinct services to cannabis companies: strategy, branding, marketing, legal compliance, and operational readiness. We are boutique. We only take on about a handful of new clients a year. And it is typically with our clients, it is a long-term, very hands-on, very close engagement.
How did your dad feel about you not going to the MBA program, but going into helping people grow marijuana and sell it?
By the time I went into cannabis in 2017, my father was long gone, so he didn't get
to hear that.
But he would have found it fascinating. I think it's a, you know, I've been in nascent industries before, industries that were right at their beginning. And cannabis is very much seemingly a nascent industry. But none of the nascent industries I've been in before, whether you look at sort of the .com boom or others, there wasn't a sort of a precursor to it. You didn't have something that existed before the internet that allowed people to find all that information and do e-commerce. There wasn't e-commerce, right? The internet was born and e-commerce was born and the boom was born, the .com boom, and this was a nascent industry that grew accordingly. Cannabis is very much a nascent industry in terms of it's recently legalized, right? 2014 in Colorado would be the real beginning of that. Even if you go back to California medicinal use legalization, which is I think 97 or 98, still a nascent industry. But for this legal industry, it's nascent, and at the same time, there's this huge gray market that existed. So there were brands and grows and cultivators and cultivars and manufacturing facilities and distributors and dispensaries, all gray market, but it was all there. So it's an interesting nascent industry that you do have de novo, you have new companies and new pieces starting, but you also have huge sections of the gray market coming out from that shadow and moving into the licensed market. And so, you know, when we look at California, 2020 will probably land, cannabis sales in California will probably land at $4.5 billion in the licensed market. And the unlicensed market, the illicit market, is still probably going to be about $8 billion. So it's still, wow, you know, dwarfs the licensed market, but it is moving. You know, I think 5 years from now, that'll be a very, very different story. But so it's fascinating to be in a nascent industry that is nascent for sure, but wait, it's got this huge precursor that's sitting there sort of pushing the nascency. It's a very strange, different, and fascinating combination. And the people, the legacy players in the industry are creative, smart, tough, resilient, interesting people. And so I really enjoy the people I'm meeting with and working with.
Yeah, that industry is getting a little tough these days. I mean, getting more and more regulated, being asked of more and more taxes, more and more liabilities. Do you have a specific niche market that you like to work with, like B2B, consumer goods?
No, we are really focused on B2C brands. That's really our area. We play a little bit on the dispensary side, but mostly we're in brand development side. Yes, it is a heavily regulated industry, as it should be. I think it's probably overtaxed right now, but that was sort of the deal the industry made with the devil, if you will. They accepted high taxation in order to be able to find some legitimacy. And I
Oh
think that
yeah.
will, over time, that will probably correct, right? And we'll end up with excise taxes that are closer to those for spirits or beer and wine. But, you know, to me, operating in a regulated industry, and I've done it before, it's just an additional cost of doing business. You know, you just have to make sure you've got a compliance department and that they're top notch and they're on top of, you know, what's got to happen and when it's got to happen and how it's got to happen and all the reporting is done, et cetera. I do think that we'll have a Schedule 1 reclassification at the federal level, probably within the next administration, at some point in the next political administration that's coming into power now in DC. And that is a major structural difference for the industry in terms of there's a IRS regulation 280E, which really is difficult. Let's just put it that way. And that alone will that will sort of cause the 280E rule will fall away for cannabis with a reclassification, and will allow the industry to really grow unharnessed from that regulation.
Absolutely. So, Michael, let's talk about the big elephant in the room. You know, we're living in a crazy time right now with COVID, and a lot of sick patients, and obviously businesses are being impacted daily. How has COVID impacted your specific business? You know, from what I'm seeing on the cannabis side, these delivery services, a lot of e-commerce are just blowing out of the water. Everyone's at home, so why not, you know, partake in some activities? But either way, how has that impacted your specific business?
Look, I've got to tell you, I think we've been very lucky in our business in that cannabis got declared an essential business, you know, early in the pandemic. Everywhere there was a little blip in Massachusetts, but certainly California, everywhere we operate was essential. That allowed all of our clients, the dispensaries, the cultivators, everybody continued to operate. And as a service provider to them, we continued to operate. And it's 2020 has been a good year for us. I say it carefully because I am very aware as an entrepreneur of the pain that is out there for business people and the high rate of failure. All I have to do is walk around my neighborhood or any neighborhood to see the number of shops that are permanently shuttered. And that is, of course, separate from, I don't mean to reduce in any way the human cost that is just unbelievable, the death and the pain that's been created by this pandemic. But we have been, you know, we've had a relatively easy go of it, certainly compared to others. And I do think, you know, I think it's going to be really interesting coming out of this window. I mean, I think the pathway seems to be getting illuminated now, right? That the vaccine is here. It will begin, you know, sounds like we may begin seeing healthcare workers even vaccinated this month. And that, you know, through the first months and through the first 6 months of next year, it's likely to become widely available so that, you know, whatever the new normal is, we're sort of getting back to a new normal, perhaps by next summer or thereabouts. And I think, you know, there's a lot of predictions about the economy. I'm not an economist. I'm not in a position to predict. I do like the UCLA Anderson School does an economic forecast. It's one of the ones I follow here, being a Southern California guy. And their prediction is actually by Q2 of next year, quite a rebound. And that the economy is going to be quite strong, 21, 22, 23 is their prediction. I found them to be a pretty good prognosticator. So, you know, we're looking forward to getting out from under this cloud as everybody is, and being able to operate more normally, being able to have meetings in person, do all of those things that we like to do in business. But yeah, what a surprising and strange year, and what an important lesson for all of us, really, to prioritize, and to you know, really understand how lucky we are the majority of the time.
Yeah, I'm calling 2020 the year of heinous humility. It's the only way I could really describe it. Is it's so bizarre, but at the same time really opens up your eyes a little bit wider to how bad things could get. So with that said, Michael, how are you coping with internal, staying at home? You mentioned something about you want to be out there, you want to shake hands, obviously, but you and I talked earlier. It's like, yeah, we've been home all day, cooped up, getting stuff done, heads down. But, how are you kind of adapting to that type of lifestyle? And also, how is that impacting you as a leader of your own organization?
Yeah. So look, I think this has been tough for most people, and there've been windows of it that have been really tough for me personally, right? I think that there are certain weeks that go by, a period of weeks, and I'm able to sort of put my nose to the grindstone and go, well, nothing to do but work and work out and catch up on the HBO series and or Netflix series, and that's the pattern of the day. And a couple of weeks go by, and I'm a pretty social animal. A couple of weeks go by, and suddenly I'm like, where is everybody? Where? Um, I'm lucky. I've got a set of friends, a very small group that we've practiced tremendous safety, and up until the latest, re-shut down, we were doing backyard get-togethers, that kind of thing. So I got some socializing there, and I've got a big family, so I've gotten to interact, and we've kept very safe households. So I've gotten a fair amount of family interaction. So I have much less to complain about than others. But nonetheless, I think it is challenging. I think the day by day of it gets very difficult. The monotony of it gets very difficult, and I think balance is really the key to that, right? I think stepping away and taking breaks, getting outside, obviously, super important. Eating well, working out, all of those things, sleeping well, all of those things that we can do to keep some kind of harmony when one portion of our lives has so much disharmony in it, I think is important. And I think recognizing from time to time really what we're dealing with. I think it's one thing I read today or yesterday, and I was surprised. I knew the number had crested up of the deaths in the United States up in the 220s, 230,000s, and I caught a news article that quoted 279,000. And so, up maybe 50,000 from the last count that I'd seen. And it made sense, right? Because I knew the number of deaths was growing, but, and it's easy to read past that number. It's so big, our brains literally can't conceptualize it, right? It's like the idea of trying to hold $1 billion or something. We can't, can't even understand it. And I think it's like that, but it's really big. I mean, when you use the comparison of, we're having a 9/11 event every day right now, every day, 3,000. I mean, that starts to
Wow.
humanize it, and I think it's important that we do that. I really do. I think that's the way the crisis of it and our longer term response, the way we're going to adapt our lives, the way we're going to vote, the way we're going to want our taxes spent, all of those things get impacted by our real assessment of what this is. And some part of that has to be emotional too, right? We have to have an emotional, visceral response to holy blank, holy shit, the 279,000 people. Like it's heartbreaking. So
you really compartmentalize it for me right now by saying the 9/11 every day. That hit me. That I did not ever think of it like that.
it
And
isn't my idea. I read it somewhere. Somebody else said it, so I can't take credit for it. But I'm probably repeating it because it hit me the same way. Right? 9/11 was such a monstrous event, and but we're losing that number of people in the United States a day.
wow.
Yeah.
When I really break it down, you're right. When we see like, oh, market's down to 10,000 points or this is down that, really don't think about it. But when you put it into terms like that, it's like explaining it to, for me, I like simplistic views,
Yeah.
and wow, that's deep. Well, Michael, last question for you. You've had the success, you've had good mentors, you've had great parents, you have 5 kids, you have a company. if you were to go back and tell yourself one thing, and your 18-year-old self, excuse me, one thing, what would you say to younger Michael Epstein?
You know, that's a really good question, Mike. It's a really good question. And I don't think there's much I would change. I would really try to be as present as possible. And I'm a pretty present guy. You know, I got training in that early in life, but to the degree that you can be as present as possible, every moment is really enjoyable. I mean, I look back at the crises of my life, and I've had a few, even those, like the learning that came out of them, sometimes the deep emotion that came out of them, sometimes the connection to other people that came out of them. Even those, it's important to be really present and certainly as present for the joy as we can possibly open our hearts to be, right? We just got to be present for that joy, right?
Yes,
The physical disconnection of COVID should really be teaching us, among other things, to just treasure every kiss and every hug, right? Even every fist bump, right? We should treasure all of that human connection and how important it is to us.
Yep. Life is short and life is leaving slowly, so got to make it all count. Couldn't agree with you more, Michael. Well, thank you so much, Michael. Really appreciate you taking the time. I know you're a busy guy, but once again, was enamored with your experience, and talking to you. I definitely confirmed that you're definitely the guy I wanted to meet. Continue doing what you're doing. Please stay in touch and stay healthy, please, because that's all that matters, right?
You too. Mike, thank you so much. It was a great conversation. Thank you for reaching out. Thank you for the opportunity to speak, and you stay healthy too.
Absolutely. Take care.